Welcome to Life, Part 2. I'm Robert Lipsyte. How do different communities treat their older populations? Does an African-American baby boomer coping with aging parents face different challenges than, say, an Hispanic or Korean-American in the same situation? And what can each of our communities learn from the other's experience? These are some of the questions we'll tackle today. But first, let's see how one Korean immigrant is caring for her 92-year-old mother.
I cannot imagine my life without my mother. I lived with her throughout my life, and without her devotion, we would not be here today, actually. That's how I feel. She's losing her memory, and she does not have a notion of what she's doing, you know. The other day, she asked me how many children I had. You know, when you get a question like that, oh my God, what's happening with mom? Doctor advised me to send her to nursing home. But if I send her to nursing home, she would not get Korean meal, which is really crucial for health and sustain her life, actually. And if I send her to nursing home, she would not be able to communicate at all. So sending her to nursing home was not my option. So I tried to find a home health aide who could speak Korean and cook Korean meal, but there wasn't anybody available in Philadelphia area. 엄마 약 잡수세요, 이거. It was really difficult. It was burden to everyone in the family. And luckily, about 3 or 4 months after, I heard somebody is coming from Connecticut who has a license. So I immediately hired her.
1, 2, 위로.
In Korea, parents are usually children's responsibility. But here, the system takes care of elderly. But still, we have a guilt feeling if we don't take care of our parents.
나 같은 죄인 살리신 주내 놀라워.
It's not just my mother. Any people out there, Korean or non-Korean, doesn't matter. Really, they have very similar needs.
이거는 부르면 슬프지, 어머니.
But my mother has added need because of a language barrier and food need, cultural barrier.
A very contemporary American story we've just seen, which brings us to our panelists. Dr. Jean Nguyen is Assistant Professor of Family Medicine and Community Health at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. Melvin Delgado is a Professor of Social Work at Boston University. He's the author and editor of many textbooks, including Latino Elders and the 21st Century. Dr. Jerry Johnson is Chief of the Division of Geriatric Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania and a Senior Fellow at Penn's Institute on Aging. He is a former president of the American Geriatric Society. Welcome all to Life, Part 2. Melvin, the movie we've just seen, yes, could that have been shot in the Latino community?
I think there were many similarities there. As I watched it, you can easily close your eyes and get a sense that you were talking about a Latino family. Mm-hmm. Concerns around cultural values not being respected, language barriers, a sense of moral duty to take care of your family rather than put somebody in a nursing home. All those are themes that we can find in the Latino community across the country. So no, that very easily, it could easily be a family with Latino background.
I mean, when an Asian family, and I hate to say that because there's Korean, there's Chinese, there's so many different, forms of Asian family, come smack up against, ensconced American institutions. There's always a rub, isn't there?
There is. The woman in that clip spoke about the fact that in America, the system takes care of older people, but the problem is that the system really isn't set up for people who are like the woman in the story, and particularly for Asian Americans, where you're dealing with such a broad range of cultures and languages. It is a challenge for any system to be able to do it well.
Yeah. Jerry, I mean, if they finally do find their way into the medical industrial complex, they're very likely to come up against doctors who are not culturally prepared for them.
Absolutely. That's one of the big challenges for all of us. First of all, there's a culture of medicine, a culture of Western medicine that often is at odds with views that ethnic groups have about the cause of disease, about the nature of help that should be provided. One of the challenges, though, that this film brought to mind, and I think it relates to what Melvin was saying, that would be a big challenge for an African-American family, would be whether or not to put the person, allow the person to go into a nursing home. There's a strong sense of concern, if not guilt, that to allow one's parent to go into a nursing home is a manifestation of neglect. And if there are not enough resources in the home, then the person doesn't get good care.
Well, this guilt and shame that might be felt is also coming up against the mainstream white boomer entitlement.
The issue of this guilt and shame is a very large issue for Asian American communities, because in many, particularly Eastern Asian communities, the concept of filial duty is predominant, and that is families are obligated to provide total and comprehensive care to their elders as they get older. And if these families are unable to do it on their own, then they are somehow not fulfilling their duties. And so people are reluctant to ask for help. They are reluctant to admit that they are unable to do what they are meant to do.
Do you think that's true in the Latino community?
Yeah, I do. As a boomer, I find that I'm really caught between two worlds here. The cultural values of my family, being born and raised in Puerto Rico, and the cultural values of this country where I was born and raised. On one level, I'm told that my parents, when they get old enough, they should go into a nursing home. That is not my responsibility. That's society's responsibility. However, on being born and raised in a culture that says no, your parents stay with you, and we'll work out a system where different family members will provide. And as a boomer, you're kind of caught between these two worlds and say, well, no, you should be able to move on your own and not worry about your parents. But on the other level, you do experience a great deal of guilt.
And one of the things is I've been hospitalized a few times, and several times with Latino roommates who brought, 100 family members.
That's exactly
along. Now, my first reaction was being irritated, But then I began to see what they were doing, that he was beginning to get the kind of care, and then some of it came over to my side of the room. He was getting kind of the care that nurses were not giving anymore.
Right.
And then I also sensed that he would get an aftercare from this extended family.
See, it's interesting because your example is classic, because it's not unusual for an older Latino to go to a medical appointment and have 4 or 5 people with them. And it's interesting. I sat in on one interview once where the doctor asked the patient a question, and then the patient's daughter answered it. And then the doctor asked the patient a question, then the uncle answered it. And then after a while, you didn't know who was the patient. So it's almost like a clash of values of individualism versus interdependence. In many other cultures, we're talking about interdependence. I'm not sick, we're all sick. If I'm not well, we're not all well. Ultimately, either the system is going to have to accommodate or we're going to have to change. And right now, I think we're at loggerheads on that. And
you know, one thing that I hear from you and that I believe is that we in the health professions have to recognize that families have variable definitions, and a family today may not be the same traditional model as family 30 or 40 years ago. The important members of the family may not live in the same house. They certainly may be either gender. There may be cousins. Sometimes the important caregivers who act like family are not biologically related at all, but have a very instrumental role in caring for an older adult. So who is accorded respect, with whom is information communicated, and I think the answers to those questions have to be more expansive than they've been in the past.
We talk so much about the dynamic of the family, the interdependence, and it seems like there's a yin and yang here, good and bad. Yes?
I think there is. The good part is that you're never alone, and you always have people around you who can help you. So at least from the Latino community, I see a lot of positives. I see tension, to be quite honest, but if I had to take it or leave it, I like it, and I would take it.
And I would agree with the Asian American community as well, that this idea of collectivism is a great strength. It holds families together. It draws upon resources from various different aspects of the family. And I agree that there's also tension because sometimes people are quite conflicted between the obligations to the family and obligations to the self. And one of the things that certainly with immigrant families that we deal with is the impact of acculturation stress on mental health. As people who have lived most of their lives from somewhere else move into this country, they have certain expectations of what life is going to be like as they grow older. And then their children who are now adults in this country may have very different ideas of what that relationship between them as adult children and their parents will be. And the culture clash can lead to pretty important mental health problems.
But you raise another point around acculturation, which for in the Latino community, there's a lot of research going on acculturation. And what they find that those of us who are born and raised in this country, when we compare ourselves with someone who was newcomer to this country, those of us who are born and raised in this country tend to be much more unhealthy. Our life expectancy is lower, which is counter-logical to what a lot of people say. Well, you've got access to this great health care. Yeah. Why are you dying earlier on? And the research takes a look and says, look, the diet of somebody who's highly acculturated in this country would be fast foods. And lack of exercise, and because of the kind of jobs you may wind up going into, compared to somebody who is a newcomer who is going to be looking at food very differently, prepared. So that there's a lot more research taking a look at the acculturation factor, and basically saying acculturation may get you more money, may get you more status, but it also gets you a shorter life.
Let me make a comment about what Melvin said. The acculturation has resulted in some ways, African Americans being more like mainstream in their thoughts than some of the other ethnic groups. One of the places where that does not hold true is a general sense of belief or trust in the healthcare system. And that presents challenges for health professionals and a need for a respectful and cautious approach to negotiation.
Yeah, well, I think the bottom line is I'm going to enter an ethnic family and have the kids take care of me.
All right.
Thank you all so much for joining us on Life Part 2.